Hey, everybody. Welcome to The Breakdown. Welcome to Substack, MillerShrivet.com. Really appreciate you being here. Today, we are talking with a couple of co-founders of an amazing group of folks, regular Americans who are using public documents to find out, the canaries in the coal mine, to lead us to clues about opening giant concentration camp warehouses or fleet movements or immigrant movements from place to place. And it's a really, really awesome group of folks called Project Saltbox. Anybody who's listening to this, but I'm sure by now has heard of Project Saltbox. You can also follow and subscribe to Project Saltbox here on Substack. It's totally free to subscribe. And so today joining me are two co-founders of Project Saltbox, Mike Riston and M. So welcome, Mike and M. How are you?
Hey, Allison, thanks. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to talk to you guys because I think what you're doing is pretty incredible. Sleuthing public documents to get information. It reminds me of how we were looking for COVID outbreaks by looking at the amount of COVID in the water supply, for example. So, talk a little bit about Project Saltbox, how you guys all got together, and what it is Project Saltbox does.
Yeah, so I guess the long and short of it is we're just a bunch of like regular, normal, average, everyday people. I say that in all seriousness. 4 or 5 months ago, we were just, a bunch of people living in Baltimore that were looking at Reddit one night, like looking at our community Reddit page. And somebody had posted on there that they were looking at sam.gov, which is this sort of like, if you were to think about it as like Craigslist for the government, it's this place where where the government goes on and they list the things that they're looking to buy or contract. Um, and so they had posted on there that they were interested in having some folks from the community that might have had some knowledge on government contracting take a look at some things that they had found because they were concerned that they had maybe read some contracts that indicated that a surge might be coming to Baltimore. So this was September, late September, early October last year. And I'm an Air Force veteran. I did a lot of work looking at federal procurement records and obviously looking at these websites. And so I said, sure, send me the documents. This was I think like a Friday night. And so they sent over 20, 30 PDFs of different solicitations that they had found. And I went into it very skeptically. I honestly didn't think that the breadcrumbs would necessarily be that public and that easy to find. I thought maybe this was just going to be a panic. Uh, but then, 48 hours later, it was Monday morning and I'm supposed to be getting my kids ready for school. And I've got the cork board up behind me with the red string, going from one contract to another because there were, I think, very clear indicators that ICE was planning, not just a scale up here in Baltimore where we're based, but really across the United States. It was probably the first real indicator of how they were going to be spending their, $45 billion One Big Beautiful Bill Act appropriation. So yeah, that group of like three of us has grown into a couple more than that. We come from a bunch of different backgrounds, but for me, my background is in, I was an intelligence analyst in the Air Force, and so looking at a lot of the technologies that they were buying, I can kind of speak to that a little bit, and then yeah, Em, if you want to talk about what you've been doing with us.
Yeah, so my background is in immigrant advocacy. I've worked in this field for the past 8 years, both here in the US and abroad. And what really drew me into working with these folks was that when they first started posting about the contracts on Reddit, and I started looking at them myself, I really hadn't ever realized that this was like publicly available information that you could go and look for. Obviously, I've seen like firsthand in real life day to day the way that the equipment and like technology that they are procuring is impacting people and the way that they use it for immigrants and people seeking status in this country. But I didn't realize that there were ways to actually find out where that technology and where that equipment was coming from. That you could look that up online and that you could see, like the place of performance. And I started learning so much about federal contracts. And so just kind of came on and started giving some like background and like contextualizing the information that we were finding. Like, for example, there was one about an alternative to detention program called the Intensive Supervision Appearance Program. And a lot of people that I work supporting have been drastically impacted and put into this program. And that lines up with the contracts that we were seeing. And so I was like, wow, yeah, this is legit. um, and yeah, it's kind of how I got here and stayed.
Yeah, and this is truly incredible stuff. Like I know some of the flight tracker folks, and after Tom Homan sort of replaced Bovino in Minneapolis, they were noticing fewer detainees on flights out to Texas and Louisiana. One day it got down to 0, and then it started going the other way where people were coming back from Texas and Louisiana to Minneapolis, presumably for their due process because of the court orders that DHS continues to ignore, mostly. But those kinds of little clues sort of give us insight into what's happening. I know that you guys had seen like 48,000 or something ready to eat meals that were being shipped to a location. And taking those things, contextualizing them with the talents that each of you have, I think has a profound impact on our understanding and also gives us time. It's like an early warning system on how to perhaps go to public hearings and present public comment, for example, on some of these warehouses that are opening. One of your recent posts on the Substack for Project Saltbox talks about seeing plans or revealing plans for a detention warehouse in a suburb in Arizona, for example. We know that one in Georgia, Social Circle, I think, had some, canaries in the coal mine about it coming online, and people were able to go in like mass numbers to that public hearing and try to prevent it. So, talk a little bit about some of these uh, indicators that you're seeing for these giant warehouses for this for-profit mass deportation
Yeah.
thing that's going on. We could talk about Arizona, Tennessee, for example.
Mhm. Yeah, so Arizona was an interesting one. Arizona, the facility that they were looking at there in Marana, which is a suburb outside of Tucson, it was previously owned and operated by the state, and then it was sold to a company called MTC. MTC is basically a for-profit prison operator, the same as Core Civic or Geo Group. They have a pretty big facility down there in Marana, and so looking at this history, the people in that city have kind of long suspected that that facility was going to be turned back on in some capacity as a detention center. The question was always when and for how much. And the town council down there has, they're that's their backyard. That's their bread and butter. The prison industry in that particular town is, that funnels a lot of money in from federal grants and funding and all the other fun things. And so they weren't necessarily giving indications to the people that it was going to come back online. They were telling the citizens down there, "We don't know. There's nothing formal. We can't say. We don't like we. You're worrying over nothing." And by watching SAM.gov, I think the last time that the public had gotten a statement from their town council was in November of last year that they were going to potentially look into something, and then came back and told the folks there, "Nope, you have nothing to worry about. This is just a defunct prison. It's never going to be used for anything else." And then we went online and looked at SAM.gov and found that there was a single source contract from the Department of Homeland Security for that specific detention center to MTC, basically saying we intend to use this as a detention warehouse to hold, upwards of 700 people. And so the very next thing that we did with that, right, we write an article. The articles that we're writing are not necessarily written to be like a New York Times or a Washington Post or a journalistic type accounting of the story. It's more of a flash alert, an intelligence alert that basically says, here's the contract, here's the information that we've pulled out of it. And then we put it on the internet as kind of a data point that folks can go and take and run with. And so we publish an article, we attach the contract to it. Again, it's publicly available. Anyone can download it. It is not like we sleuthed our way into into their database and broke things out of the computer. It's just right there on sam.gov. So we pulled it off and archived it and shared it with folks. And then the next thing we do is we turn around and we talk to two folks. We talk to journalists that are on the ground in those communities that understand the context and understand, what that story means for the people living there. So in this case, it was Arizona Public Radio or Arizona Public Media. We reached out to them and sent the story along, and then we turn around to the folks that are on the ground that are doing the organizing, and we provide it to them. And we put the data in their hands. And the idea is that if they're going to go stand in front of a city council or a county council, or if they're going to pull in their Congress people, then instead of saying, I am opposed to a detention center in my community, which I think is a sound enough argument on its own merits. But understanding that the audience that they're talking to, it matters a lot to be able to go in and say, I oppose a detention center in my neighborhood because this particular detention center is going to hold 700 people. It's not zoned for it. It doesn't have the resources for it. It's going to cost, $250 million of taxpayer funding to get it online. And then once the people are inside of it, there's no water, there's no electricity, there's no XYZ. And those very compelling arguments make it difficult, not always impossible, depending on the moral integrity of the person you're talking to, but it makes it more difficult for those city council members or those county council members to push you away and ignore what you're saying when you back it up with facts. And so we are very much towards action driven data that drives action. And so that's what we did in Marana. And it was very funny because I reached out to the town council there for comment, and they said, "We don't know what you're talking about." And then I sent them a copy of the contract, and their public affairs specialist came back and said, "We still don't know what you're talking about. No one consulted with us." So it shows that even in friendly territory, right, on ground that ICE is friendly with, they're still not communicating with the people that run those cities, as much as they're not communicating with the communities there. So, yeah, you find out a lot by pulling threads and asking questions.
And let me ask you, we reported this a little bit on the Daily Beans a few weeks back that these detention centers are really, really unpopular, even in really red rural areas, and a lot of it has to do with the infrastructure or the lack of infrastructure. And like I said, we had one listener of the podcast who wrote in who's a insurance floodplain expert and was like, people who live near these facilities really should be going to their city council, their town council, and saying, have you done this environmental study? Have you done the floodplain study? Is this going to impact my homeowner's insurance? Like stuff that can really muck up the works. Can you talk a little bit about, I remember the social circle one is like a town of 5,000 people or something, which is like a tenth of how many people they want to house in this warehouse that they're trying to open. So, can you talk a little bit about the infrastructure that Mike briefly touched on and how it doesn't support a lot of these giant, huge mass deportation facilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think um, I'll start by saying that it's been really interesting, after working in this space for so long, seeing, like, what resonates with people and, like, what part of this, um, people, they kind of, like, find their niche and, uh, turn it into, like, this argument that fits into, like, their own individual beliefs. So, I think there's a lot of people, like you were saying, that, are against these warehouses, people who, like, don't necessarily share, like, our political views, or they have differing views on immigration in general. And I think trying to, like, frame the data and the information in a way that is going to resonate with a wider array of people. Um, so I think that that's been really interesting. I think for the warehouses in particular, um, I think it's also interesting because these detention facilities are known already, like ICE detention facilities that they've operated for years are known for having gross human rights violations, for just being horrific and having people in squalor. And um, I think that these are kind of it's really resonating with people because it's just so obvious that these buildings are not meant to hold people. Whereas I think there was kind of this, like, separation of thinking, oh, detention facilities, like that was made for to hold people that are being detained, even if it didn't have good infrastructure either. Then the warehouses, it's just like, no, it's very clear that their plan is to treat human beings as commodities. And I think that that is something that has just really caught on to a lot of people. And people are like, wow, no, like this isn't okay. And housing that many people um, is going to affect every aspect of like our local economy, of our neighbors, of like the jobs that it's going to supposedly create, the promises that are made of like um, the when they try to first like convince local council people that detention facilities are beneficial. That is an argument that they have tried to make, that it brings jobs and that it will just like stimulate the economy in certain ways. And I think it's also interesting that they haven't tried to do that with these warehouses. And they've tried to hide it because they know that this is something that is just not unpalatable. It's just completely
Yeah.
unprecedented. So,
I was
I
actually
would
surprised to learn that most of the folks in these rural areas, I figured like, oh, go after their NIMBY nature or their we don't want immigrants in our neighborhood nature or it's going to cost us too much money nature. But most people are actually just against the idea of warehousing human beings. And that actually, I was very, like, I hate to say pleasantly surprised by that, but you know what I mean? Like, I thought we would have to appeal to a different part of human nature in order to get folks to be against these warehouses. But most
right.
people are just against warehousing human beings at this massive level. And then pile onto it, the environmental impact or the impact to the neighborhood, the impact to the economy. There's just, like you said, nothing beneficial about having one of these warehouses in your area.
I'll frame it this way too, because M was talking about the financial impacts to communities, and it made me think about Merrimack, New Hampshire, in particular. As you're looking at all of these different warehouses from an infrastructure perspective, an industrial shell, for shipping goods is generally only outfitted for like the plumbing of the people that work there. So like 4 toilets, 2 sinks and a shower is generally what they put in there. And so the plumbing, the sewage, all of that water throughput and output reflects in what pipes they put into that facility. And then when you add 1,500 to 10,000 people on top of that, you're talking about having to completely gut that facility to rerun the plumbing, connect it not to a federal sewer because that doesn't exist. They'd have to connect it to municipal sewers. They'd have to connect it to, in some states, when they did the initial plans for these buildings, they capped it to 11,000 gallons per day. The math that you have to do to arrive to how much water a human being uses is you say one human being generally in a detention setting between laundry, cooking, drinking water, using the restroom, taking showers, it's like 131 gallons per day, based on reverse engineering ICE's math. So 131 gallons per day times 10,000 people is how much water you're extracting from local reservoirs. That's how much water you're extracting out of places that are in droughts in the case of Western Maryland. A lot of councils have been pushing back on that. They're saying we don't have the funding. We don't have the ability to upgrade our water purification centers. And what ICE immediately did is they came back and said, no, we'll fund you. You're going to have so much, income from property taxes. Well, in doing that, they told a lie because these facilities are federal facilities and they're not taxed at the state level because of the supremacy clause. So they're not receiving, the states are losing in some cases like $700,000 a year in tax stream revenue. And then, when the states pushed back on that and some said, hey, you're lying to us and this has no financial impact. My favorite thing that I've seen so far, and by favorite, I mean, I actually like laughed out loud when I saw this, is ICE solicited an urgent bid for technology called Implan, which is economic modeling software that they needed to buy because they then had to turn around and forecast to the states what kind of economic benefits were going to come from this. So within a week of them buying this very expensive $169,000 a year software, they began spitting out more concrete numbers. Oh, this is going to bring $250 million worth of jobs to your communities over the course of 3 years as we fit this out. But then when you start pulling it apart, what you realize is, in the case of New Hampshire, the document that they gave to Governor Ayotte had sales tax and income tax, which are both taxes that New Hampshire does not have. So even in creating the modeling, they're doing it wrong. They're not experienced in how to use it. They're just throwing money at a problem and hoping that they can convince people that this is a good thing.
Oh, well, they've got tons of money, and but it's funny that you say, "Oh, well, you just tax us with our thing." We don't. No, that's not how the world works. Yeah, the incompetence and the cruelty mixed together are pretty astounding. Talk to me a little bit before we get out of here about the Minneapolis fleet, ICE fleet, moving to Williamsburg. You guys picked this up and wrote about it on Project Saltbox here on Substack.
Yeah, that came from some communications that we were able to get our hands on pretty early on. I think, again, people are realizing that they can actually speak up and use their particular skills and like their proximity to certain things in as like part of resistance, and like for us to be able to like arm our communities with this knowledge and immediately start getting organized. We've been tracking that for like the cars specifically that they're using for like the past, well, I guess a while. Michael, I don't remember when we first like noticed
At least the last month, we've been watching cars moving in and out of Baltimore and counting them.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is probably the most not, I mean, it's all very alarming. It's hard to, but like an actual like material, like physical sign of an impending operation here that is similar to things that we've seen in other cities. And I guess just trying to figure out what that would even look like here, because Maryland, the landscape here is just so different from Minneapolis, from Chicago. And I think just having that knowledge and making sure that other people know about it is, yeah, it's just trying
So
that's been
helpful.
kind of like
It's
yeah.
so helpful. Just to, like Mike said, it's not just about getting the information, it's about giving it to activist groups and local governments and state governments, and to be like, just wanted to let you know this is happening, right near you.
Yeah. I also would say that a big part of this has been kind of making, helping people realize that these things are a little bit like smaller than they might appear. There is always kind of somebody behind the curtain. Like, yes, these federal contracts are these big thing. I have heard of like the Geo Group and of like Core Civic for a long time operating and like profiting off the incarceration of people for many, many years, but didn't really understand the kind of like tiers of contracting and how it goes all the way down to the local level where people can actually start public pressure campaigns. And it's people that like are in the community or that live nearby and own their own businesses. And they don't necessarily want, like that kind of negative image, or they don't want people to know what the business that they're doing, and finding ways to resist just by like knowing exactly who is behind the curtain and like making these decisions, and that you can actually do something about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
M raises such a good point there that the people that are behind this, the people that are profiting obviously are the big ones, but it's little people that are profiting off this too, and it's little people that are uh, driving change. It's everyday people. It's parking garage attendants. It's actors at your local improv group. It's folks that see things and know things and have insight that are willing to speak up and share what they know. That's undoing a lot of the terror that's inevitably coming to our communities. But those are the kind of people that we need right now.
Yeah.
And so I'll just tack that onto what M said. Everything plus uh, raise one up for the little guys because there's so many of them out there that are making this possible.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like blanket contractors and laundry contractors
Yeah.
and food, I mean, there's just so many people that have to be involved in an operation of a warehouse that houses 10,000 people, that's kind of where you can find some pressure points. And that's where it's awesome that people are standing up and helping out. And speaking of that, tell everybody how they can help you out rather than, I mean, I'm sure there's a better way than just to have 10,000 people send you information because it takes so long to sort through. Is there first of all, I just want to recommend everybody for free subscribe to Project Saltbox here on Substack and get their updates, because through comments and through messages, if you have any additional information, like that floodplain guy who wrote into us, you can do it that way. I think we lost M
We
because of the
did.
internet connection, but we'll keep running here for the last minute. Talk about what everybody listening here, can do to help Project Saltbox, which, by the way, are the little boxes on the side of the road in Baltimore that melt ice. I thought that was very clever. So tell everybody what they can do to get involved.
Yeah, a couple things. The first one is obviously start thinking hyper locally. So I think the right now the notion is let's think about what we can do at a national level, and I would challenge folks to rethink that and start thinking what you can do at a neighborhood level, at a block level, or even at the city level before you go any bigger than that, because there's so much talent already in cities and communities all over the United States that can band together and either mirror what we are doing or run with what we're doing and do it in their own neighborhoods. And I'll say this, something like in the state of Maryland, 25,000 federal employees lost their jobs in the first year of the Trump administration. And that's a lot of people with a lot of really strong talents, like filing petitions against local, state, and federal governments for things like National Environmental Protection Act violations or, procedural act violations. And that's the kind of work that we desperately need people doing. So if you have, my call to everyone out there is I'm going to use a woman we know in Hagerstown that's doing this. She's got years of experience filing petitions against the government, and she has been filing them left, right, and center against DHS for violating NEPA, and it's working. It's slowing them down because they didn't do due diligence. So if you've got those skills, think about how you can use them in your state, in your county, to slow down what's happening and shine a light on the gross failure that's happening at a procedural level to make the wheels turn. And then, get to know your neighbors and know what skills that they have and talk about what's right for your community. Because what's right for Baltimore is definitely not going to be right for Marana. It's definitely not going to be right for Social Circle. But what we can provide you is data. And what you can do with that data is organize around it and figure out how that works for your particular town or your particular region and run with it because you're the experts. We have data, but you out there listening, those of you that are working in data visualization or property real estate or floodplain insurance, you're the folks that are going to slow this down. You are the heroes of this story. Don't wait for federal elected representatives or anyone else to come swoop in and save you. You're the heroes in this story. What you do with the data and what you do with the information matters at your local level, and that's where you stop these things.
I love that. My dream is that you guys put together a little packet on how to open up your own Project Saltbox chapter in the town where you live. And we got all these little salt boxes popping up all over the country. Even though we don't need road salt in San Diego, I think it would be fantastic anyway. Just my
For
little
sure.
dream. Just my little dream. I appreciate you coming on today. Thank you for doing all you're doing. Thanks to Matto for having you guys on. I know you guys blew up after that, and I'm really excited that folks can now subscribe to your Substack at absolutely $0 to continually get this information. But I echo your call: do this locally where you live. Put together a group of experts who can do the same thing where you live, and let's keep this going because hyperlocality is, I think, the key because community is. So I appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, thanks, AG. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody, stick around. I have to say we'll be right back with the good news. But that's because I'm going to drop this particular interview onto the Daily Beans podcast.
Perfect.
So when I talk to the people listening right now, we won't be right back with the good news, but we will tomorrow on the Daily Beans podcast, and which is also free to subscribe to. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Yeah.
Everybody stick around. We'll be right back with the good news.
Bye.
Bye, guys.